Chapter 17. The Problem with Ghosts. There was an argument happening up on deck. G.A. could hear muffled voices coming through the timbers above him, but he stayed where he was. He just wanted to keep his eyes closed and shut out the world for a while longer. To be invisible, to keep out of sight. To be where things could pass through him and nothing hurt anymore. To just be a ghost. Up on deck it was an awful mess. The rigging was torn and scorch mark from Chroniese Pin's attack peppered the woodwork. Anyone who wasn't nursing wounds caused by the debris now strewn everywhere watched nervously as Dominator stood squarely in front of Morland and Haidur. The three of them were in the midst of a furious row. "I'm telling you he's dead! I saw it!"
"I won't accept that from the likes of you!"
Haidur bellowed.
"We must put about and start search at once!"
"I'm not going back anywhere near that place, and I won't take any of my friends with me," said Dominator, standing his ground between the sailors and the whipstaff.
"Send the ghost back down. Send anybody,"
yelled Morland desperately. "No one is going down there," shouted Dominator. "We're getting away from here as fast as we can." Morland seized him by the collar, his eyes blazing with tears of frustration.
"We will put about now, or I will have you skinned."
Dominator breathed heavily but didn't say a word, looking straight back at him. Morland stared him dead in the eye, then let the air out through his teeth.
"Fine."
He turned and limped across the deck and vanished. In less than 2 minutes he was back on deck carrying his pack, the leaves of his fruit tree sticking through the top, and a spool of rope.
"If any of you value your lives, or our captain's, you will leave this ship with me. Now!"
The Feld Notions were taken aback.
"Wait, you can't leave,"
spluttered Honno, jogging after him.
"We cannot leave our captain to the mercy of the sea,"
said Haidur, following Morland, who was already lowering himself down the rope ladder into the dinghy, still tethered behind the ship.
"We've all spoken to our prince. His Highness has already agreed. Anyone who wishes to leave will do so,"
said Bligh. Everyone wheeled around to stare at Tepid. He stood quite still, looking briefly between the Feld Notions and the sailors. Then he nodded. "No," said Morphea slowly. "Not you, Tepid."
"His Highness has made up his mind to come with us,"
said Seaward.
"and so he will come. It's not up to you, Miss Morphea."
Tepid waited for both sailors to step into the boat before he climbed down the ladder to join them. He glanced back at the ragged group where Morphea stood, shaking, bowed his head, and slipped out of sight.
"Wait, please!"
Abrian shouted.
"We can't finish on our own!"
Bligh and Seaward were following suit, with small packs and reluctant faces.
"Please, there's no point. I saw him,"
said Abrian weakly.
"I saw him."
Bligh paused. As if he were carrying the heaviest weight he'd ever lifted, he looked back at Abrian.
"I know, but I can't leave my shipmates to search on their own. We will either find him and lay our consciences to rest, or we won't, and then we'll know he's not dead, just gone back to wherever he came from."
"Without your help, we've got no hope!" yelled Dominator, running to the rail as the dinghy cast off.
"Hope is never lost,"
they heard Bligh call as the dinghy departed.
"You've just forgotten where you put it."
When G.A. opened his eyes, the weak light of evening filtered through a porthole at the other end of the deck. All was quiet. Whatever argument had been going on must have ended a long time ago. Very slowly, he uncurled himself from where he'd been floating and headed in search of anyone to find out what was happening. The ship didn't seem to be moving. After a few minutes searching, he found his brother, tucked into his customary corner and staring through a gap in the wood as if he was seeing something else altogether. G.A. noticed the tight strip of bandages beneath his shirt and around his feet, and a pang of guilt mingled with gratitude shot through him. What happened to your feet?" he asked. E.A. looked up startled, then glanced down at his feet.
"Just caught in some magic," he said. "They're a bit sore, that's all."
"Oh." GA desperately wanted to say something good, something to make EA feel better. He wanted him to know he'd do anything to repay him and the others for rescuing him. But the memories of what had happened burned too fresh and bright in his mind. In the end, he couldn't find any words. "I was going to find Delilah," was all he could manage. "Check she's all right." EA nodded, not meeting his eye, but as GA turned to leave, he said,
"Before you go, could I talk with you for a moment?"
"Of course." GA floated down beside his brother and waited attentively.
"I thought you were so brave going down there today,"
said EA steadily.
"You really have no sense of danger anymore."
GA had hoped his brother wasn't going to talk about that and braced himself for the inevitable telling off. I just didn't think about anything as dangerous as that. I thought mermaids might cause trouble, and that was what Delilah was worried about. But I never imagined I would." The words got stuck, and he couldn't continue. But EA shook his head. To his surprise, GA saw he wasn't angry at all, but was very pale, even more than usual. When EA spoke again, his voice shook slightly.
How much do you know about being a ghost, GA?"
GA frowned. "I know I'm blue, that I have to imagine what I look like. It gets on people's nerves when I appear through walls and they're in the bath. Why do you ask?" EA nodded to himself, as if this confirmed something.
"And how much do you remember about being alive?"
GA was taken aback by this question, and then even more so when he realised how hard he had to think about the answer. I can remember... I remember the wind felt cold. The grass was sort of chilly and damp after that red moon appeared, and I was solid for a little while. I don't remember much. I was so worried about other stuff. But there was this one thing, a kind of warm thumping inside. He pointed to his chest, and EA smiled a little.
"That was your heartbeat, GA."
"Oh, of course." GA felt wrong-footed. Of course that was what it was, but the sensation felt so far away now. The more he thought about it, there were other things that had faded away into distant corners of his mind, like small lights growing dim. "Why can't I remember that?" he muttered, perplexed.
It's all right. Just focus on that memory,"
said EA hastily.
"The more you'll remember, the more you'll—"
But GA had already picked up on something in his tone of voice before EA could rethink what he was saying. "The more I'll what?" EA looked at his brother, unable to escape now as he met his eyes. The ground was already slipping away from beneath his feet.
"The more you'll stay yourself, even when we're not the same anymore, and we—"
GA didn't understand what his brother was saying, but something cold was beginning to slide down inside him. There was nothing but silence. He couldn't even hear the rain. EA took a deep, unsteady breath.
"You'll need to take care of yourself, because you can't age. That monster proved you can still get damaged, though you won't... You can't die. If one day, when we're gone and you forget yourself, you'll fade. I've been reading that book, searching for answers, for a way to fix it for you. So one day you won't have to be left behind. But I..."
He paused as his voice broke. Images began piecing themselves together in GA's mind. EA hiding his height in Shnoema, Delilah's hair growing again, Hono's cousin having a baby. Life was moving, they were all changing, but he was staying the same.
"Well, I'm going to carry on reading,"
went on EA.
"And keep an open mind, because I don't want to grow up without GA."
He looked around, but GA had faded invisible. Even when he called for him, there was no answer. "You shouldn't have told him," said Delilah, her voice sounding choked. He didn't need to know, not yet. She stood frozen, halfway down the ladder from the upper deck, tears streaming down her face. When EA didn't respond, Delilah climbed down hurriedly and ran past, calling for GA, her shouts echoing through the silent deck. But he was nowhere to be found. Left alone, EA quietly looked back to the gap in the timbers for a moment, before burying his face in his shaking hands. GA didn't reappear all that night. Delilah didn't know if he was even on the ship anymore or if he had flown far away. It wasn't until the late morning of the next day when she finally noticed his faint outline slipping through the rigging. Then the wind moved the limp sheets and she lost sight of him again. Then a soft voice inside her whispered something. "This way." Slowly she walked along the length of the empty deck, stepping around the tangles of rope and the smashed crates. Her bare feet padded up the cold damp steps and past the whipstaff, resting still and solitary without its master. The air grew colder as a gentle mist closed in. Delilah walked on, past the closed door of the captain's cabin, and softly clambered up the ladder to the very end of the ship. GA was floating silently at the stern of the ship, scarcely visible at the edges, looking frayed and tired. He could have been a shroud left hanging in the still air. Delilah stood some distance behind, waiting for any sign of movement, but none came. She looked away up to the sky and its rolling grey clouds, and took a shuddering breath of the chilly air. "It's cold," she said quietly. "I didn't think it would be so cold." She bowed her head and shivered. "Do you think we could go somewhere else? Get away, anywhere, away from this?" Delilah shut her eyes, blocking out the sea and the sky. "I can't." GA's voice broke the air, as quiet as the water lapping the hull below. Delilah looked up and GA turned to face her. He seemed unsteady, yet he held himself upright. As he turned, his eyes looked like silver chains within were pulling the weight of his soul behind them. "I have to think things might turn out better than we hope." The corners of his mouth twitched a little. "Will you come with me?" Delilah's eyes burned as she looked into his. Any words she might have said ached in her throat. She nodded. "Always." The others stayed below as the rain continued through that morning, now falling heavier than ever. Everything had been turned on its head. Everyone wanted to ask the same question, but no one dared say it out loud. Do we go back? Down in the lower decks, Morphea sat at the table with her fingers steepled, staring at the wall. Beside her, Dominator looked as if he had been shouting at himself in his own head, while Annie paced up and down behind them. Abrin sat looking at his map, with Pippa lying across it, but all the flames of his usual curiosity and ingenuity had been extinguished. Gina hid in her hair, with her arm around Honno, who was rather red-eyed. EA sat at the far end, not looking at anybody. The boards creaked as Delilah and GA approached. Abrin looked up at once.
"GA, you've reappeared. We thought you'd vanished,"
he said, blinking as if he'd been asleep. "I did for a while," said GA quietly. "But, well, I'm here now, whatever the outcome." He caught his brother's eye for a fleeting moment and gave the smallest of smiles that said a lot more than words ever could. EA saw it but looked away, drawing his knees in tighter to his chest. "Why aren't we moving?" GA asked after a pause, turning back to his friends. They all exchanged long looks. Aren't we going to..." "I don't know. Frankly, I'm tired, I'm scared, and have no idea what we're doing," said Morphea, looking up fiercely. "Yes, you heard. Scared. Anyone who says they're immune to fear is stupid. This mission has been one mishap after another, each one more dangerous than the last. I'm so tired, GA. I'm so tired,
And we've made a right mess of it,
said Honno.
The sailors didn't deserve to lose their captain. It feels like our fault he's gone. Now Bligh, Morland, all of them have left with Tepid in tow, and we're stuck.
But it's such a waste if we stop now, broke in Delilah frustratedly. All that hard work. We'll have come all this way for nothing. We can't sail without the Nausians showing us how, said Annie. We'll just go round in circles and Failnor will be underwater by the time we get to the rain monster. It will definitely be underwater if we don't do something, said Delilah, images of the mud-drenched deserts of Tengasharu still fresh in her mind, with its dead trees, brown grass and stinking bogs. I agree, said Dominator, but I don't know what that something is. Between us all, we're a group of young, inexperienced nobodies with no idea what we're doing or supposed to do. And I can't help but wonder if we've bitten off more than we can chew this time. G.A. couldn't find the words to change Dominator's mind. He'd hoped his friends weren't as scared as he was. Time wasn't on his side, but it was still there for them. They could use it, even if he couldn't. But how could he make them see that? And it was so hard to think with that creaking sound. Wait, that creaking sound? Dominator and Morphea stood up as one. Where's that coming from? Someone was pushing up the hatch leading down to the hold. The others peered over to look. It couldn't be. Together, Morphea and Dominator peeled back the hatch.
I'm getting quite good at this stowaway business, aren't I?
Said a familiar voice from below. Ah! Morphea shrieked and slammed the hatch shut again. There was a muffled wail from below as it crushed several of Tepid's fingers.
Ow! I might.
The prince had to explain himself at least 3 times to everyone, bandaging his fingers as he talked.
Oh, really? Now, again?
He said, exasperated.
Do listen. I spoke to Bligh below decks before your discussion with Masters Haidur and Morland took a turn for the worst. It was clear they intended to depart in search of their captain, though I did not believe Captain Oola was with us any more.
He paused and drew a deep sigh.
However, I feared there would be an ugly scene if the sailors didn't think that they had their prince's blessing. It was only right I appeared to go with them, for your sakes as much as my own. Bligh and I agreed I should stay below decks. Now, I'm not usually one for using magic, but I might be permitted to say that a little can go a long way when used well enough. Orange magic is so useful for conjuring. All of you saw me leave the ship with our crew, while the real Prince of Nausea sat snugly in the hold, working hard to keep the magic going until Bligh and the others had gone far enough away. Now they have travelled a good distance in search of their captain, and will continue to do so until Morland and Haidur's hearts are set at rest. They will have to manage the surprising disappearance of the 5th member of their party themselves, though I am confident Bligh will explain well enough.
Having dressed his wounds, he adjusted the sleeve of his jacket. Satisfied the bandages were hidden under the cuff, he looked up to face them.
It has been awful to see you all in such a state. Yes, I confess I heard your conversations, and I do apologise for earwigging. More so, I must apologise for subjecting you to this mission.
He looked at each of them, his face serious.
It was my idea to begin with, and my presumptuous thinking forced you to accept the burden of this journey and all its misfortunes. I had begun to think I was cured from these attitudes which caused all of you to end my rule in Failnor. But now I've been reminded in the cruellest way that I am by no means cured, as the consequences of my actions have once again shown. To Captain Oola, to you, Aluiciuous twins, to you, dear brothers-in-arms of Failnor, I offer my humblest apologies.
Please shut up. Tepid looked up from his deep bow. Dominator gritted his teeth, every ounce of strength he had left fighting to retain the 2 fat tears threatening to break away and roll down his face. You, Mr. Tepid, will not make me emotional. This wasn't all your idea. Abrian thought of it first. We chose to go on this mission because we want our home dry again, and because it's our responsibility, and we're all too stupid to say no. Because for some daft reason we care a bit. And maybe for some even more stupid reason, we thought Nausea probably needed the help too. Captain Oola died because of a stupid fat sea monster. GA and EA died because of a stupid horrid witch. And we're all brothers in arms, running Feldnor and stuck living all together in a castle because of a stupid Nausean prince who doesn't know what he's doing. Just like us. Tepid was lost for words. GA had never seen him so dumbstruck, but something in what Dominator said struck somewhere within each of them. Honno found himself standing up, though he didn't know why, and Annie's eyes seemed to have regained some of their sparkle. So, you chose to stay with us, said Morphea, speaking for the first time since breaking Tepid's fingers. Tepid nodded, touching the bandages nervously. Then show us how to sail.
I beg your pardon?
You're a Nausean, aren't you? Said Annie. Show us how to sail and let's get the rest of this stupid adventure over and done with, once and for all.
I would be more than happy to oblige, as long as I don't have to haul out the sheets myself,
said Tepid, waggling his delicate digits. Annie giggled.
But what about your mermaid scales?
He added, and looked at GA, whose spirits sank. I'm sorry, he said slowly. In all the confusion, I think I dropped... There was a very loud splash from above deck. Only then did Honno realise Gina had gone. It was a mad scramble to see who could get to the top deck first. By the time they'd all made it outside, Gina was climbing back over the rail, soaking wet and panting. With her eyes shining, she thrust out her hand. Its contents clacked together. I can do things right sometimes, she said, as Honno took the mermaid scales as if they were made of glass. I told you I could go down there easily.
But your element,
stuttered Abrian, utterly amazed.
Jumping into water like that without thinking, isn't that dangerous for you?
I got the idea from a friend who did the same for me once, said Gina, looking at EA. It was worth a chance.
Look at these, they're beautiful,
said Honno, staring at the glistening scales. Yes, stare away, why don't you? Chided Gina, snatching the scales back. Honestly, shouldn't you give them to Abrian? He's got a potion poison pill thing to make. And Delilah, you've got to do some sort of magic to cook it, haven't you? Then you've got to go and dry off and let us get on with it, Delilah smiled, taking the scales and passing them to Abrian. But he stayed still. The thought of what might lie ahead still churned inside him. He looked round to GA, hovering beside them.
What about you? Do you still want to go, after all the danger I put you in?
GA shook his head. Don't, Abrian, please. It wasn't your fault, all right? It wasn't. Abrian bit his lip and swallowed hard. Somewhere inside him, a smidgen of courage fought its way through.
All right then,
he said.
Let's finish what we started.